Good day, everyone, and welcome to our lecture for today. This is S031, Understanding the Self. And today we will be concentrating on the material self, cogito ergo consum, consumer culture, and the material self. Diderot said, I was absolute master of my old dressing gown, but I have become a slave to my new one. Have your parents at one point ever bought something, say a designer center table, from your local shopping mall and returned home only to realize how all the furniture in the living room looked so old and dusty in comparison? Did they immediately go back to the mall and bought a new rug and an ornate vase, maybe also a couple of upholstered pillows thrown in for good measure to complement the newly purchased item? If your answer to both is then the so-called Diderot effect has already taken place. Now, the Diderot effect is one of the most commonly experienced phenomena of consumption out there. Now, it's originally articulated through an essay entitled Regrets on Parting with My Old Dressing Gown by 18th century French philosopher Denis Diderot. This phenomenon suggests that one innocent purchase can unexpectedly spiral into an endless cycle of complementary consumption. William James said, in its widest possible sense, a man's self is the sum total of all that he can call his. And when we talk about all that he can call his, we are including here all our material wealth, all our possessions. According to Hermann Lotze in Microcosmos, each time we get to wear garments of varying kind is a chance for us to bring them into relationship with the surface of our body and inject them with the very consciousness of our personal existence. Next to the body, we have clothes and family in the material self hierarchy are the properties that we acquire. Of course, if you are going to look at all the things that we need in the hierarchy of it all, we have the body, the clothes, and the family, and then we have the material properties that one gets to acquire through life. Now, the accumulation of such comprises the empirical self-wealth, and thus is perceived as most intimately ours because it is made possible by our labor, in particular if we are already earning. In short, the purchase of an item is not just considered an investment in the monetary sense, but also from the standpoint of the material self. Because we develop an attachment with most of the things we buy, because we accord the same to the resources that enable us to accomplish those transactions. Now, this rationalizes our feelings of sadness upon losing some of our personal belongings. Say, for example, you lost your watch, you lost your phone, you broke your laptop, and whatnot. This is what William James, in the phase of material loss, considers the shrinkage of the personality. This is why we die a little every time we lose some of our possessions. Now, Benjamin Barber said, consumerism has attached itself to a noble identity politics in which business itself plays a role in forging identities conducive to buying and selling. We couldn't agree more on this. Now, to slightly modify a well-known aphorism, it says necessity is the mother of all consumption. We say essentials like food and clothing are bought, and so is shelter. And in our every waking moment, we transact services and goods. In supermarkets and malls, we give away what is essentially the material manifestation of our labor, which is money, in exchange for these items, and we are made aware of these items through commercial advertisements. Back then, our ideas about consumer items are picked up from print and TV, but with the advent of social media, information on goods and services are now able to reach us at a much faster rate. In effect, advertisers need only to strategically tap into our very source. The irrefutable fact is this: consumption has become so pervasive that it now seems second nature to all of us, part of our identity even. The role of products and services in our lives are now above their literal purpose, for they have become the means through which we all express our different lifestyles, brands, are not just anymore mere veneers on deeper identities, but have become surrogates of who we have become. On the flip side, not every society puts premium on material consumption. We talk about consumer culture also here, okay? Because in some agrarian societies, basic subsistence is a way of life. Food is not so much bought as they are planted and eventually harvested. This stands in stark contrast with contemporary Western cultures, which removes focus on austerity, meaning simplicity, while increasing emphasis on buying. Now let's look at the semiotics of consumption. You see, our everyday interactions are governed by signs and symbols. And even outside linguistics and literature, we still encounter systems of codes from which we draw different meanings. According to Ferdinand de Saussure, meanings are based off conventions and are by nature arbitrary. Thus, words are unmotivated signs with no fixed definitions. Essentially, present always is the signifier, which can be a phrase, a sound, or an image, and the signified or the concept or abstraction to it. In addition, meanings assigned to words are said to be relational. That is, one cannot be defined in complete isolation from others. Symbols are frequently seen as being imbued with very specific historical or cultural significations. This is all depending on one's socio-cultural, socio-political background. The foundations of subjectivity are determined by a person's linguistic discursive status, by the dominant discursive practices in his or her immediate context. And also here we will be looking at the concept or denotation and connotation. When we speak of denotation or the object language, this is defined as the literal interpretation of something. While when we speak of connotation, this pertains to culture, specific meanings and ideologies attached to a specific culture. For example, if you're going to look at the screen, denotation is the literal meaning. You are a dog, means that you are literally a canine. Connotation is the implied or suggested meaning. You are a dog suggests that you are ugly or morally detestable. That is how we try to differentiate denotation from connotation. And now look at, you have here Fernando Fo Jr., the king of Philippine cinema. We know that Fernando Fo Jr. is an actor, the denotative meaning of which is that he's a Filipino actor and director who once ran for president. But the connotation of the name is that he was the idol of the masses and champion of the poor, physical embodiment of righteousness and this. Now, in all these conversations about the material self, now how do we decide what to buy? According to Philip Kotler, there are 5 stages of buyer decision process. First, we have the needs arousal recognition, the information search, evaluation of alternatives, purchase decision, and lastly, post-purchase behavior or feelings. We'll look at the needs recognition or needs arousal, where here, the buyer has a need to satisfy or a problem that needs solving. Next, we do search for information about the things that we need to buy. This is where we go for information search, where buyers begin to look around to find out what's out there in terms of choice. Next, we evaluate the alternatives. We try to see and evaluate the available alternatives. And the buyer here then decides upon a set of criteria by which to assess each alternative. Next, we have the decision process. Okay? The purchase decision, where buyer makes the final choice of what to buy and from whom to buy it. And lastly, after there's what we call as the post-purchase behavior feelings. This is the process where the process continues even when the product or service is being consumed by the individual or business. Are we satisfied? Are we not satisfied about what we bought? That is what we talk about when we say post-purchase behavior. Or now John Calvin, he said that if we are only to pass through earth, we ought undoubtedly to make such a use of its blessings as will rather assist than retard in our journey. This is where Calvinist principle comes in. Now, John Calvin is a Protestant theologian who argued passionately against the Catholic doctrine's espousal of asceticism. When we say asceticism, it's a lifestyle of austerity. It's a lifestyle of radical simplicity, often characterized by mental and physical discipline. For Calvin, it is through the consumption of material goods that people can truly fulfill God's desires. He emphasized, though, that material consumption and wealth accumulation should be done in moderation. For him, a person's hard work justifies his or her consumption. If you are working so hard, then it's just okay for you to buy it because you worked hard for it. The rich are assumed to be the industrious lot whose wealth was willed by God. The same logic applies to the opposite. The poor do not work as hard, so their eventual deprivation of the divine beneficence. Okay? And what happened to them? Well deserved. And so we have the Marxist perspective. Here's Karl Marx saying that no production without a need. But consumption actually reproduces. Now, the Marxist thought has positioned consumer culture within the capitalist economic model. Some academic disciplines which says that there should be a consciousness that should be determined by the society. For Karl Marx, it is the society that dictates that consciousness. Now, the irony is that though the consciousness of the proletariats, the working class, is heavily decided for them by the ruling class, the latter prevents the former from developing class consciousness. Again, if we say proletariats, so these are the workers who have no means of production of their own and are thus forced to sell their labor power to buy stuff and pay the bills. While when we speak of the ruling class, this is the centralized power, okay, where the power is actually centralized on itself and performs the majority of the political and economic functions in a given society. Now, when consciousness, as we were saying a while ago, this is the self-awareness of individuals belonging to a specific class, used in these contexts as the workers collectively becoming more conscious of their rights and their ideological opposition to the ruling class. The Marxist perspective also speaks of the concepts of fetishism, a rather primitive belief. It has its roots in anthropology that inanimate objects can be imbued with godlike powers, while when we talk about commodity fetishism, this pertains to how certain goods are given high monetary value with no regard for the labor that went into their creation. Now, as we move along and as we summarize this, the material self, according to William James, is centered on the physical body, with emphasis on one's material possessions and the family to which he or she belongs. This figures in quite prominently within the broader context of consumer culture, which tells of how consumption is normalized in a given society. This naturally affects identity formation, as our material possessions and preferred lifestyles slowly become extensions of who we are. And that wraps up our discussion on the material self, ergo consumer culture, and the material self.